the back of winning one of the biggest beefs we have ever seen in hip-hop history, Kendrick Lamar comes through with his very own Victory Lap album with GNX. I do feel as though some people may be thinking it's diminishing what the album is doing by calling it just a Victory Lap album. I think the album does shoot for a few other things as well, but I think through and through what we have here is very much a Victory Lap release, right? Kendrick is rapping from a place of high confidence, a place of knowing he is the shit. He is deserving of being the greatest of all time now. He's the king of the mountain. He's the top of the hill, the top of the food chain. And that's exactly the angle he takes across pretty much this whole album. There's a confidence here exuberating from Kendrick in a way that we just really haven't ever seen. He's always been a confident rapper. He's always had tracks where he's bragged, although maybe not as much as your average rapper. But he's done it before. But this time it just feels so different to what you would expect from Kendrick Lamar. You just do not get an album like this if it wasn't for what happened during the summer. And for that, I say, thank you, Drake. Gotta give Drake some props. Drake allowed Kendrick to rap in a state like this, and we would never have had this album otherwise. Let's be honest. Like, you don't go from Mr. Morale to this without defeating Drake in that kind of way. Thank you, Drake. And while without naming Drake directly, or saying or uttering anything close to his name on this album, he still has a lot to say about Drake. Let's be honest, man. There is still quite a bit to be said about Mr. Aubrey Graham on this album. Throughout the entirety of it, there are still little nuggets planted in. There's still little Easter eggs that you can grab and find that still feel like they're referencing Drake, who he is as a person, and where Kendrick stands in this world of rap, and where he stands in the culture now, and how, again, he is seeing himself as the top of this pack and nobody can really touch him. The opening track, Whacked Out Murals, while has a little bit more to say about the general state of hip-hop, still has a few name drops here about other rappers that make Kendrick just feel a little bit disappointed in where they've ended up taking a turn or doing things that Kendrick just wouldn't have really ever expected. The Lil Wayne thing, how he's been bitching and moaning about how he never got the Super Bowl. Let's just make this clear as well, by the way. Lil Wayne was never getting that Super Bowl. I'm sorry. Unless somebody had said behind the scenes to him that he was, and I'm obviously not aware of that and I can't vouch for that, then okay, hold my hands up, fine. If nobody did say that, then yeah, he was never getting a Super Bowl. I'm sorry, Lil Wayne is a legend. Lil Wayne has classics. Lil Wayne is a recognizable name in the world of music. But Lil Wayne is notoriously shit live. Like, there is no way you would ever risk on such a major stage giving that to Lil Wayne. I just had to get that out there because I haven't really spoken much about it on this channel or in a video at all. So I just want to get that out there. That whole thing with Drake fans dogpiling and even Nicki Minaj fans dogpiling on Kendrick when he got announced for the Super Bowl was total, utter sour grapes. It was stupid. They were doing everything they can to just drag down Kendrick, and Wayne was basically a pawn that they used to do that. And no, the whole thing was stupid. Kendrick, what he said on this track isn't even a diss towards Wayne, really. It's just a bit like, come on, man, like, could you not just be a bit more humble here? And he does follow it up by saying everybody's questionable, and then talks about how Snoop Dogg did something questionable after as well. It's not a direct attacking, scathing diss. It's just a bit like, the people in my life I thought were close to me and I thought had my back and I thought more of me than they do, in these situations have let me down a little bit here, and it's a bit disappointing to see. Only Nas is really here to congratulate me, and I just don't feel like that's how it should be, and it wasn't something he necessarily felt was the case. It's a little bit, if you think about how like Drake was responding to everyone kind of dogpiling on him, although it's very different in terms of the amount of people that came after Drake in the summer, with Kendrick kind of being like the main guy on top of it all. But it's a little bit like that, where it was just a bit like, hang on, what's going on here? Like, I didn't see any of this coming. This seems a bit odd. Like, Future, I thought we were cool. Like, Kendrick's kind of doing that in a bit more of a less defensive way, and just kind of just being a bit like, what's going on here, guys? On top of all that, though, Kendrick has a lot more to say on this track, talking about how he never pretended to be anything for a rap image. He never acted like he was, you know, something else. He's always just being himself. He's always just being the person, the authentic self he is. The person who he presents himself is who he is, which I think a lot of people do believe, to be honest with you. Even prior to this beef, I've always felt that Kendrick's really done a good job of presenting himself and criticizing himself while also criticizing others. I mean, before this album, he dropped an album that was literally like, guys, I'm not your savior. I have not been the best person, and you shouldn't hold me on that pedestal. And all these other people you hold on a pedestal as well, you shouldn't do that either, because they're flawed too. And he's always done a good job of being like, I'm not great, but I have things to say, and I want to say them because I think it's important to say. Like, I think he's done a good job of doing that, and I think he's earned the right to say that on a song, because not many other rappers really are always authentic and can sometimes rap about things that they don't actually live by. It's a very packed song with a lot more to say than just that on it, so I think maybe just diminishing it just to those things is probably not really doing it the best service or giving it the best amount of praise. But yeah, it's a really cool song. There's this like darkness, there's this kind of like eeriness, and it feels like, again, Kendrick is just kind of like bringing out this animal that's ready to sort of just explode and really take down the industry, or maybe take down the culture. If you kind of push him hard enough, he will maybe do it. A little bit like the Day the Party Died track that he dropped on only Instagram. A little bit like that, where it's like he's got some things to say about rappers and the way they move in the industry, Drake being one of them, and he's not really too sure if they're always being them authentic selves. Immediately after, you have the track that we've been all bloody waiting for, with Squabble Up, which was the intro track that popped up on the Not Like Us video. I think there's a lot of interesting lyrics here, which again feel like post-beef stuff. Which is funny, because obviously he had that lined up before Not Like Us even came out and ended up being the smash hit that it was. But he was obviously so confident that he's this reincarnated, reimbursed, sort of re-envisioned person in the world, that now like he feels so different and he feels so free of maybe what was holding him back before, because now it's just like I'm all out to go balls to the wall and kill any rapper that comes in sight. That was always there in him, but it feels like it's unleashed now, and you can tell that that's what the first sort of section of the track is basically referencing. But yeah, the rest of the track is this really weird, jaunty banger that pulls out this quite obscure sample from like a sort of like dance house song from years ago, but it's sort of interpreted in this new kind of like West Coast vibe on this track. The Squabble Up refrain on the chorus is great too. It reminds me of that Squidward meme where he's just a bit like, and all the like the lights are like flashing. It just reminds me of that. It's got this kind of weird like psych feel to it, but it's so cool. The immediate banger from the album that I think will have success right out the gate, because again, people were waiting for this song because of that released verse or section of the song that had come out through the Not Like Us video, but not the song that I think is going to stick around the longest. I think, in fact, there's a couple of tracks that I do think over time will end up surpassing this track and be more popular and be the more recognizable songs from the album. Luther being the track that comes immediately after this on the album, that I think that applies to the most, because not only is SZA absolutely killing it at the moment and had one of her biggest runs over the past couple of years with massive singles, but the song itself just sounds so spectacular. I mean, Kendrick has done this melodic rap kind of R&B fused stuff before and has seen a massive success with it, from the album Damn, most notably, of course, the track Loyalty being the one that's a pretty obvious reference point, or maybe even more obvious reference point than that would be Love from the album. Two tracks that really did do massive things for Kendrick Lamar and did huge numbers for him, right? But Luther is kind of in that bag again, and I personally think it does what he was doing before so much better. In fact, I've always been a little bit conflicted with Damn overall as an album. I've always felt some of those kind of, melodic pop moments don't always land too well, and yet here we are with Luther kind of vindicate my opinion on that, because it just goes to show that he can do it so well, and it's appealing to me way more here than it ever did on Damn. The Cheryl Lynn Luther Vandross sample, my friends, is just chef's kiss. That is how you intertwine a sample so bloody good. It's not even the first time he does it on this album too. There are plenty more times on the album where he does it so well. And yeah, Jesus Christ, sounds ridiculously good. It's so sweet. It's a little saccharine in places, maybe with the vocals. Perhaps some people might find it a little too much, but I think it's just enough and gets it done so well. I mean, shout out Cheryl Lynn as well, and Luther Vandross. I mean, they're legends of like the pop R&B world from previous decades, but nowadays, do you hear many people talk about them? Not really. You should hear them discussed a lot more than they are, because they are true legends of the game. Another obvious hit from the album that again I think will surpass the short-term success of Squabble Up. Not to hate on Squabble Up, I think that's a good track. I just think there's a few tracks on this album that will ultimately be bigger than that eventually. TV Off. I mean, come on. TV Off, one of the biggest, most fun, electric bangers Kendrick Lamar has ever made. I'm going to go on record and say it. I'm going to 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 say it. That truly is Kendrick Lamar at his best, bringing that West Coast flair that we've heard him do so many times before over the years. We heard it on To Pimp a Butterfly. It's really nice to see it come back on this album. Post the Beef, you can clearly see that he just kind of wants to bring back his roots and have this kind of be like a celebratory, West Coast win, by also having all of these West Coast features all over this album as well. You can clearly see what Kendrick is trying to do, right? I don't need to tell you, it's pretty obvious. But yeah, TV Off, man. The mustard is just so funny. It's honestly the modern day equivalent to the window, to the wow. Like, never in my life would I think Kendrick would have his own Lil Jon moment. I mean, Lil Jon is the Lil Jon moment. There's nobody else that can replicate a Lil Jon moment, and yet Kendrick Lamar is out here showing us he can have his own. Just such a great bounce to it. The production's great. Kendrick just is really killing me with some of these lines, like the two bitches arguing, basically both hoes thing that he says. So many great little one-liners on this one, man. Just Kendrick having a lot of fun, not taking it too seriously. What a song. West Coast flair ends up coming up in different ways on this album, in more kind of subtle ways, but nicely incorporated as well. I feel like Hey Now has this nocturnal kind of minimalist vibe to it, but also you can kind of feel like the West Coast bounce coming through, some of that G-Funk isms popping up as well towards the end of the track. I really like this one. Dodger Blue as well, I feel as though it's gotten a bit of an underrated reputation from this album. I'm seeing people rank it as one of the worst. I actually think it's got this really nice sliding, gliding, subtle feel to it. Like, I think if you kind of get yourself lost in the beat a little bit, I think you'll find yourself enjoying it quite a bit more than you would initially on first listen. Like, it isn't one that stands out immediately, but that is a track that kind of was ultimately quite intoxicating for me and just had a bit of a nice vibe to it that I didn't initially catch. Peekaboo as well, again, goes for a different thing, but still has that similar vibe to it. What they talk about nothing. What they talk about is so funny. And then that little bit as well where he's like, you wouldn't understand what I'm on right now, you wouldn't understand this right now. Again, maybe a little bit of a dig towards the people that tend to gloss over his lyrics because sometimes they're not like as obvious on first listen, and maybe they have double meanings. Like, I think that was kind of a dig at those people. But on this album, he tells you on the first track that he's like, I'm not here for the double entendres this time, guys. Like, this is going straight to the point, and you're just being hit with way more direct lyrics than maybe I've ever given you before, and I'm not wasting time with any of that. I'm just giving you it straight up as you can read it, and it's on the surface and it's obvious, and I think that's very clear throughout the whole album too. Man at the Garden being the most obvious example of that. I mean, how clear as day can you make a song, honestly? Like, Kendrick Lamar usually tries to wrap things up in different sort of energies and gives you kind of, again, these entendres and triples and all that kind of stuff. But this track, man, it's just like, okay, yeah, very much an obvious biblical reference, and then also basically like telling us how he deserves it all. What do you think you deserve to be the greatest of all time? Like, what makes you think you deserve that? Right at the end of the track, I wonder who he... I wonder who he's talking. Oh, I don't know. Who's he saying that? Oh, I don't know. Is it the baby? Oh, it might be. He might be saying that to the baby. No. Come on. You know who he's talking to. He's decided now, post his beef. If there was ever any question who the greatest of all time was, there isn't now, because he took down the big guy. Kendrick Lamar. He thinks he deserves it all now. Contrary to what I just said about the lyrics kind of being a bit more straightforward, direct on this album, I do think Reincarnated kind of takes a little bit of a turn, where this track, which samples Tupac very nicely, and again feels like a little bit of a subliminal or an obvious diss, you could say, towards Drake for the Tupac mimic that he did earlier this year. But this time Kendrick's like, look guys, I can do it. Here I am showing you how to really do it. But yeah, this track does feel a little bit more complex with some of the writing here. I feel as though you've got this kind of like 3-part of the track, very much again discussing how, you know, he's reincarnated, he's shedded some skin, he's not the person he once was before. But then at the end of the track, he's talking what seems to be God or Father, he refers as him to, basically kind of like struggling with where he sort of goes from here and how he just wants peace, but he's also like, no, you don't want peace, you're all here for the war, you're not about this. Like, very much kind of battling maybe his inner demons, being like, I am reincarnated, but where do I go from here? He's reincarnated, but he's still got some of those past things in him, and he's still holding on to perhaps some of those things, and that's where the grappling with God comes in, because it's like, no, I want peace, but you still got that war in you as well. Like, yeah, very interesting track, but Kendrick kind of highlighting his lyrical abilities on this one comparatively to maybe some of the other tracks on here that are maybe a little bit more, again, straightforward, simplistic for Kendrick's usual standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean the songs take a massive hit. I will say GNX, the title track, is very much considered the weakest track on the album, and honestly, I kind of get it. Like, I think it's definitely the worst track. I appreciate Kendrick and the features coming through to try and go over a bit of a weird off-kilter beat, and it's pretty difficult to rap over a beat like this. I mean, I think maybe give this like to Danny Brown and he'd be the only person that could, because whenever there's just an odd off-color, weird, experimental beat, you just hand it to Danny Brown and he's got it covered. But yeah, I don't know if any of the rappers really find a pocket on this track. I don't know if you can properly find a pocket, but something about it just doesn't quite land. But I at least appreciate it being not an easy beat to rap over. I mean, it's definitely up there with one of Kendrick's most odd beats throughout his entire discography. Have to mention Heart Part 6 too. Of course, he still gave it that title. I don't think Kendrick was ever going to shy away from naming his next Heart the Heart Part 6. Of course, he was always going to, but good God, this track is so wonderful as well. I mean, Jesus Christ. This SWV sample is just excellent. Again, similar to Luther, just the usage and utilization of that is done so well. Shout out SWV as well. Bit of an underrated 90s R&B group, really. I mean, Jesus Christ. comparatively to like some of their contemporaries from that era, SWV are just up there with being one of the best, and yet they're nowhere near talked about. Like, they're not talked about in the same way TLC are or Destiny's Child. No hate on either of those, but I'm just saying SWV should still be in that conversation because so good, and this track is done so well. Again, lyrically interesting here, talking a little bit more about, like, you know, the heart, like the heart itself, and that's what lives above everything else. And yeah, you can feel it a lot on this track. I mean, the heart tends to be where Kendrick is in that current moment. This moment, he's shouting out love, shouting out respect to his fellow black hippie guys, TDE, that kind of thing. Really nice to see him pay homage to those. Again, that like love for the West Coast and love for where Kendrick is from is really very much omnipresent across this whole album. Like, so many tracks feel very much indebted and inspired by the West Coast. It just feels like he's using that as a way to kind of celebrate this victory. This is a West Coast victory. Kendrick represents more than just himself. This is a victory for the culture. The album closes out with Gloria, this celebratory, victorious track that is very much the obvious way to close out the Victory Lap album. Just wonderful production here. SZA again coming through with some amazing vocal work. Just, yeah, an absolutely to die for song. I feel like what Luther goes for in a bit more of a sweeter sound, this one goes for a bit more of like a triumphant, excuse the pun, glorious sound as well, because when her vocals come in right at the end of the track, I mean, she sounds absolutely exquisite. Like, seriously, she sounds amazing on that moment. Quite obvious as well, that little section where it does close out the song. There's the Euphoria reference, which I think is pretty on the nose, pretty obvious. And then also the Notorious reference that comes through, which I thought was interesting because of the Notorious B.I.G. not really like name dropping Tupac and stuff like that. Drake isn't name dropped on this album. I feel like I am mentioning Drake a lot on this album. Maybe that isn't something people want to see in a review, but I can't help but feel like there just is all of these little messages still kind of being like directed towards it. You know, I still think Kendrick's got a lot of that on his mind. It's still part of the year, it's still part of like this album because it's the album right after what happened with the beef. It does make sense. It does feel very much like a victory lap, and so many other places where you look on this album and try and interpret it another way, and you just can't. I mean, I just can't not interpret Gloria in the way that it's set out as it is. It's just difficult not to. But while Drake is spending his time suing UMG for the fact that Not Like Us exists in the first place, you've got to say Kendrick has earned this. Like, he's earned the fact that he is in this place right now, feeling confident, still talking about things post the beef, still making those references to Drake, even if they're not quite as direct and straight in your face obvious. Like, of course that's going to be what this album's about. It's not long since that all happened, and it is a massive moment for hip-hop history, and Kendrick is inspired in a completely new way on this album in which we've never seen him be like before. So yeah, I think it nicely separates the album from the rest of his albums. It feels totally new and totally different. When you just feel like an artist can't give you something without repeating themselves, he somehow does it, because how many different versions of Kendrick are we going to see? Like Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, Damn, Mr. Morale, and now GNX. Like, what a varied discography he has here. Like, all of these albums focus on different things. They all still feel like Kendrick albums. They still feel authentic, but like they just don't even sound anything alike. They're all about completely different things as well. It's just remarkable to see. So yeah, I think this is a great album, and I think it's better than his past couple of albums too. I've seen some people say this. I'm going to echo that opinion. I do think I like it a lot more than Damn, and I do think I like it a little bit more than Mr. Morale too. Is it touching his greatest ever? I don't know if he can with an album like this. I don't think it can be a good Kid Mad City. I don't think it can be a To Pimp a Butterfly. But I don't think it's ever trying to be those. And I don't think he's ever going to shoot for those albums again, which is what makes those two albums so special. I don't think he'll ever try and make albums like those ever again. But yeah, if this is what he's like at the moment, this is what he's going for, a bit more of a straightforward kind of banger focused album, 44 minutes, straight to the point, I'm happy for it. This is the exact kind of album I've always wanted from Kendrick, and he has delivered. Yeah, what can I say? 8 out of 10 from me. This is definitely one of the best rap albums of the year. I think Kendrick has killed it here, and honestly could maybe grow to be a higher score in the future as well. I think just with how replayable I think it's going to be, could give me more fond feelings towards it later down the line. But for sure, still fantastic for me. It's a great album, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with me, disagree? Do you think it's up there with one of his best? Do you think it's down lower in his discography? Let me know. Subscribe if you haven't already. Would love to see more people in the comments as well, sticking around, and have a good day. Check out my Patreon if you're feeling generous. Goodbye.